Welcome to the Tech Talk Show with me, Kazeem, this afternoon. And my guest on today's show is Jeff. Good afternoon, or is it good morning where you are, Jeff?
It's good morning. Just got started, got some coffee, got out the door, into the room to work. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, all right. So today on the Tech Talk, we're going to be talking about preparing cloud environment using Azure Landing Zone. But before we delve into the topic now proper, let's have you, Jeff, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh yeah, sure. So a little bit about me. I have been working in technology for let's see, a little bit over 18 years. So I started, just kind of break fix for computers for friends and networking and like doing it so much that I made it a job to help people with their networks and businesses. And then after that, started a business as a managed service provider. And then once I got done with that, once I got done, when I realized that it was time that I needed to get more engagement across the business, I ended up selling that line of business and then working for another managed service provider for Office 365 and Azure services. And after that, went to work at Microsoft, focused on partner solutions, helping build partner solutions for Azure for about 3.5 years. And then recently, I became a senior program manager on the apps and infrastructure solution team working on landing zones. So, for me, that journey was all about growth, accepting new challenges. I remember when I first got into the business, virtualization wise, we were on VMware 3.5, ESXi 3.5, and I walked into from my first on-site job to help with a server that wouldn't boot, and just like came into a command console for VMware 3.5 ESXi and was like, what is this? And kind of learned about virtualization from that point and how to fix VMs. So that was a while ago, but yeah, it's been a great journey and got to meet lots of great people like yourself.
Okay, so thank you for that intro, Jeff. So landing zone, right? When I first heard that term landing zone, Jeff, I thought it was a new Azure service, right? So I just
Uh-huh.
couldn't help but just quickly look it up to find out what it's all about. So I would like us to start with that. I would like us to assume zero knowledge that will be for people that will be watching this at a later time now. So what exactly is landing zone? Azure
So
Landing Zone, that is.
yeah, Azure Landing Zone. So your Azure Landing Zone is the output of multi-subscription Azure environment that accounts for scale, security, governance, networking, and identity, right? So the idea is that any application that you bring to Azure, you need to have set requirements, right? So just like if you're defining a landing zone for a helicopter, you need to have a certain amount of square footage, a certain amount of clearance, right? Same thing is true for your application. When you bring an application into an environment, you need to make sure that you've thought about those mandatory shared services that that application needs. And so the landing zone sets up the mandatory Azure platform services that a customer would need to bring all of their applications into the cloud, right? So the Azure Landing Zone is the operationalization of Azure to facilitate a customer's either net new application that they're moving into the cloud, or to facilitate in a brownfield scenario management of your environment at scale, where you've got hundreds or thousands of subscriptions.
Okay. All right. So what are those very important components or pieces, if I can call it that now, that makes up the Azure Landing Zone?
Yeah, so we have critical design areas. So if you look at the Azure Landing Zone, you have requirements for identity, right? And so identity
Yeah.
is a critical design area. You need to make sure that you've got the proper identity and access management in place, as well as role-based access control. So that's one of the critical design areas. Another critical design area is network topology and connectivity. And so when you talk about the core networking that your application that's going to be in the cloud needs, whether it's connected only to online resources or connected in an enclave in sort of scenario where it's only connected to the corporate environment, or if it's hybrid, where you've got connectivity to branch offices as well as to other cloud providers or potentially PaaS services within Azure. So connectivity is a core part there. Resource organization. So this is how you organize your subscriptions, how you organize your resources within the Azure platform. So that's another critical design area. And then I'd say the each one of these critical design areas that we have for the Azure Landing Zone are meant to give you considerations and recommendations for building your environment. So when we talk about, for example, identity and access management, one that we went into a bit of detail just a moment ago, we want to make sure that a customer is taking considerations for their access plane, their control plane when it comes to identity, and that they're using the enterprise directory, right, for authentication, and that we want to make recommendations for them, things like hybrid identity, so branching your on-premises Active Directory into Azure Active Directory, and using that as a single control plane, right? That's where we make considerations and recommendations. So we have those critical design areas, 8 critical design areas across the landing zone, and then we have recommendations and considerations that help customers quickly make architectural decisions so that they can adopt the cloud quickly.
Okay. Okay. So these different components that we have make up the landing zone now. Can we start simple, or do we need to have all of these different building blocks all in place at once? Or do you think we can start simple and start to add the building blocks as time goes on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we found with the customers is that their Azure Landing Zone approach depends upon their cloud operating model. Also depends upon the acceleration of which they can learn things like having a tool set for infrastructure as code. If you're capable to adopt infrastructure as code, you're going to have a lot of standardization. You're going to have a lot of benefits, change management. You're going to have a lot of benefits to your code base that you as an operating team manage, and just the repeatable tasks, right? That's just a default benefit. But then there's also a lot of benefit to getting hands-on and starting as quickly as possible, building that experience on understanding your requirements of how an Azure storage account relates to a virtual network and connectivity options. And so you want to build and learn those things. So the Azure Landing Zone Cloud Option Framework has an Azure Landing Zone section, and inside of it there are 2 approaches: start small and expand, and enterprise scale landing zone. And start small and expand is like you want to get started, you just have bare minimum requirements, you don't have a lot of regulatory requirements, you just want to get something stood up and learn and ideate as you go, and change your code base as you go. And then we have the enterprise scale landing zone option, and enterprise scale landing zone has all of the rich compliance, has the rich implementation of networking for hub spoke or virtual WAN, has those components built into it. So you can start with enterprise scale landing zone and have that rich implementation that includes your policy auditing, right? Includes deployment of core services, things like log analytics and your Azure activity log going directly into log analytics when new subscriptions are created. So as a best practice. So you've got those 2 options, right? Start small, expand, ideate, or enterprise scale landing zone to start with a more robust environment from the start.
Okay. I'm aware that there are some businesses now that have set up their workloads on Azure, but not necessarily following the landing zone footprint now. So I'm curious, you're the expert, Jeff. What do we lose if we choose not to work with the landing zone concept?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I think the landing zone guidance that's was created for the purposes of helping our customers make architectural decisions, number 1. Number 2, accelerate their adoption of infrastructure as code. We know that that helps organizations, it helps connect services within Azure, and that's where our customers get deep value with the Azure services with integration. So understanding infrastructure as code and integration into the platform. And then the third challenge is we wanted to give IT the control, right? We wanted them to have full audit visibility, the ability to approve subscriptions that get created for business units, and know that those new subscriptions have the mandatory compliance and security settings that they need so that a development team can just work, right? And so when we talk about a customer who already has resources in Azure, there is certainly that case when we engage with customers. That's actually our number one engagement model, is a lot of customers already have things in Azure. And so it becomes a fact of, okay, based on the enterprise scale landing zone architecture that we have today, we do an assessment and say, does the customer look like this? What decisions did they make? And then do they have the what must be true to be successful? So do they know the decisions they need to make for their architecture? Have they scaled their management groups appropriately for the management of their subscriptions? Those core, what we call design principle things that we're looking for, which is if you look at it, right, we want to see Azure policies in place. We want to see that Azure policy is set at the management group level, so then it's inherited by the subscriptions, right? So those are two places that we start with a customer who already has a landing zone investment but is looking at enterprise scale, is to say, okay, what are the practices we can start to prepare you for so that you can adopt this new model. And policy-driven guardrails for Azure subscriptions is a design principle of enterprise scale landing zone. So when we work with a customer, what we'll do is we'll deploy enterprise scale, because you can enterprise scale deploys at a management group level. So whatever the customer currently has in place for their current management group structure there won't be any effect to that when we deploy enterprise scale. So we deploy enterprise scale, and then we can do a comparison between the two, and we can plan to move those subscriptions on the appropriate management group. So that helps us with accelerating a customer's adoption of the management style, because we only have to do resource group or subscription moves into the new management structure for those management groups.
Okay, thank you for bringing clarity to that. But in your explanation now, you've mentioned management, you've mentioned developers and users as well. So it would be nice to understand whose responsibility does the whole idea of building a landing zone fall under? Is it the responsibility of the management now, or the developers, the IT pro, or is it a concept that everyone really must understand?
Yeah, so you've got this cloud operating model, which is these different teams that work within customers to execute cloud operations, right? Most commonly, what we've seen within customers is a role called platform ops. And so there's this platform ops team that is responsible for the configuration. It could be a mixture of sysops. System ops is a common team title as well. So this platform ops, system ops team is has the primary responsibility for the platform landing zone. And then application team owners, they have their responsibility to deploy their artifacts and their applications within the realm of what the platform team has created for them, right? Within the environment within Azure that has been created for them. So most of the time we're seeing that role lies with this platform ops enablement, cloud enablement team, or the Cloud Center of Excellence. And then the application team is responsible for their environment. So if their environment, with enterprise scale landing zone, the app ops team executes on a subscription level. So that within an Azure subscription, they're deploying resources and then making those resources available to the organization or to the business. So that's the two roles that we see primarily responsible for landing zones. Is the platform ops team is responsible for the platform, and then the application has its requirements. And so you've got this application ops team that works with the platform ops team to make sure that their requirements are understood. So for example, if you're branch network needs virtual networks to have a certain NSG or ASG, the application team has to make that request known, right, to the platform team, and then they can put it in place. And that is more of a centralized IT approach, whereas we have some customers who are not in centralized IT, who are in decentralized IT. And so in their scenario, the application developer is also the platform owner. So they have to deploy both pieces of it. So it just depends on where your business is and what type of cloud operating model you have.
Okay. Okay. You acknowledged earlier that businesses sometimes would already have their workload on Azure, right? So for this kind of businesses already with their workload on Azure, without much knowledge of the concept of the landing zone, so I want to ask, when really is a good time to start worrying about the Azure landing zone? Or at what point, for those customers now, does the landing zone become really important, for them to really look at?
Yeah, so I'd say the landing zone is really important with, two lenses on. The first lens is just platform success, right? So to be successful on the Azure platform, there's some things that must be true, right? And those things that must be true are using, policies to audit and know that you're in compliance with what the business goals are. The other thing that must be true is, you have to have core identity in place, and so you have to have shared services stood up for your landing zone. So those are things that must be true for you to have success there. And then I'd say the second thing is like when you are planning your landing zone for your application, you want to take in all of the benefits that are native to the platform, right? So we have what we call design principles, and one of those that sticks out is that we're archetype neutral. So rather than thinking about an application that you're moving to the cloud, within the concept of, well, this is just an infrastructure as service VM I'm going to move and store over into the cloud, think about it from what is the application doing? What does the application need, right? And so it could be core infrastructure, in which case you may be talking virtual machines, or you may be talking services now, right? And we talked about Azure Active Directory, SAML authentication for applications. Where we're looking at the platform from a holistic perspective now and saying, what does the application need, and not looking at specific SaaS or PaaS or IaaS model for the delivery of everything, but how can we get the most out of the cloud and integrate across the board? And so your landing zone is always going to be important to the functionality of your application, and as well as to your success on the platform. So I'd say those two things.
Oh, okay. And my final question now is for these customers still now without much knowledge of the Azure landing zone, or that already have their workloads in place on Azure, what would be your advice finally to these kind of customers?
Yeah, so my advice is your North Star is to focus on your application, right? Your journey, whatever that solution is, whether it's a container solution or a virtual desktop solution, or an ERP solution, something like an SAP, right? You've got an application that you want to run in Azure. And so for your landing zone, you've got to get ready. So if you look at the phases of the cloud adoption framework, we have 6 phases, right? So you've got to create a strategy, you've got to create a plan, you have to understand your landscape, and complete that workshop to understand the whole portfolio of what you have. And then you target that specific application. So like I mentioned, SAP, containers, virtual workspace, and say, okay, I'm going to deploy this on Azure, and then decide whether or not you want to start with something robust like the enterprise scale landing zone for compliance needs or for scale requirements to get started quickly, or if you want to go with that start small and expand template that we have, which will get you set up with the basics. And then at that point, just start deploying and start learning. But yeah, the great place to start, we have reference implementations. So on the cloud option framework, you can go to aka.ms/Azure/adopt to learn more about the Azure landing zone. And while you're there, we have reference implementations on GitHub that you can use to deploy in your environment. And so that will get you the hands-on experience that you need to feel that confidence as you're moving your applications to the cloud.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me on the show today. Although it's not Wednesday, but I'm really glad you were still able to
Yeah.
join me on the line.
Yeah.
All
Thanks for
right.
having me.
Yes. So here's where we're going to call it a wrap on today's episode of the Tech Talk. So remember to subscribe to the channel Tech Talk Wednesday on YouTube if you haven't done so already. So any last word before we say goodbye, Jeff?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Kazeem. Great to be here and great to learn more about what you guys are doing to help people learn more about technology and get into the field. It's very exciting. Encourage everyone to lean in and learn as much as you can. Growth mentality, 100%. And yeah, would love your feedback on Azure Landing Zones.
All right, so you've heard it all from Jeff today. So let's have a super afternoon, and I'll see you some other time. So it's bye bye from me and Jeff now.
Bye bye.